Christianity is coming back into public schools, and we need to talk about it. So that leads us to the aforementioned 2022 court case, which is called Kennedy versus Bremerton School District. And again, I did not hear about this court case when it happened. I feel like there should have been so much more news surrounding it. This is utterly outrageous, in my opinion, and people should have been on the streets protesting this. So in 2022, prayer in public schools again came to the forefront of a Supreme Court case. Like I said, Kennedy versus Bremerton School District. But this time it is in regards to prayer and sports. So this Coach Kennedy, for several years, he led the team in team prayers. And he also gave them motivational speeches, as a coach would do. But his speeches had some religious undertones. And when I say religious, I mean Christian. Okay. And several years passed. And finally somebody, I don't know how it surfaced that he was doing this or why it took so long for people to realize this, but eventually the school found out and asked him to stop. Now, he did stop the motivational speeches with some religious concepts, but he did not stop praying, and he continued to pray on the field, and students joined in the prayer with him. Ultimately, he was suspended from his job for obvious reasons. Now, the group First Liberty, which is a group that fights for religious freedom, as if we need a group that fights for religious Christian freedom when there are things like this happening, but anyways, the group First Liberty presented Kennedy's case, and it was ultimately elevated to the Supreme Court, and the court, of course, sadly, ruled in Kennedy's favor. The decision was based on the fact that Kennedy's prayer was supposedly private, even though it was on the middle of the football field, or the sidelines, I'm sorry, maybe not the middle, but it was on the football field. But it was private because he did not ask his students to join in. They did so voluntarily. Again, he still did it in front of people. And they also ruled that it was constitutional because the prayer did not include a government-created or government-funded message. And one of the arguments was that if they had prohibited such actions, it would be the same as prohibiting a Christian from wearing a cross necklace, or it would be like firing a Muslim teacher for wearing a headscarf. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit later about why those comparisons are ridiculous, but that was their argument. That was why the ultimate decision was in favor of Coach Kennedy, and they ultimately deemed the act constitutional. And again, in this decision, in deciding that this act was constitutional, they removed the Lemon Test. This is a court case that removed the Lemon Test, okay? And decided that we should be looking at the Establishment Clause and actions that potentially violate the Establishment Clause in a historical light, okay? So after the 2022 case was decided, the Department of Education updated their policies. And it says, although the Constitution forbids public school officials acting in their official capacities from directing or favoring prayer, students and teachers do not shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gates. I would argue that teachers do shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech when they enter the school. The Department of Education also outlines specific student rights. It says that nothing in the Constitution prohibits any public school student from voluntarily praying at any time before, during, or after the school day, and therefore students may pray with fellow students during the school day on the same terms and conditions that they may engage in other comparable conversations or activities. Students may also speak to and attempt to persuade their peers about religious matters, just as they may do with regard to, for example, political matters. Understandable. As long as students don't interrupt the education, the school day, they are free to talk about what they want. They can talk to their peers about religion, politics, video games, I don't know, whatever they want, because they're students. And ultimately, as long as they're not using school funding to promote those ideas and opinions, that's fine. They're free to do so. Now, what seems a bit icky and perhaps even contradictory is the section for educators. Now remember, we just read a section that said educators do not shed their constitutional right to free speech at the schoolhouse door. We just read that. The Department of Education then goes on to say, when teachers, coaches, and other public school officials speak in their official capacities, they may not engage in prayer or promote religious views. More broadly, when public employees make statements pursuant to their official duties, the employees are not speaking as citizens for First Amendment purposes, and the Constitution does not insulate their communications from employer discipline. That goes directly against what it said in the first section that said that students and teachers do not shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech. Well, the language is a little bit different. It clearly says that when they are doing their official duties as a teacher, as a coach, as an educator, their speech is not protected by the First Amendment, right? And they are subject to discipline from the school. Again, so why did the court go with Coach Kennedy? I don't know. But anyways, you can see how this is contradictory, right? It first says that teachers don't shed their constitutional rights, and then says, well, when they're operating in their official duties, we can't protect their First Amendment rights. Crazy. Now, the Department of Education immediately goes on to say that in contexts where a school permits teachers, coaches, and other employees to engage in personal speech, however, it may not prohibit those employees from engaging in prayer merely because it is religious or because some observers, including students, might misperceive the school as endorsing that expression. That said, a school may take reasonable measures to ensure that teachers, coaches, and other school officials do not pressure or encourage students to join in the private prayer of those officials or other students. Now, I have a few questions about this. First, in what context can an educator engage in personal speech? Because that's not clarified here. So that was a question that I had. What context are we talking about? Now, what I immediately imagined was, let's say a teacher is in their classroom in a free period doing lesson planning or before school starts. They're in their classroom alone, and I don't know, maybe they pull out their Bible to do some Bible reading, or they pray over the students, they pray over their day, they pray over the chairs, whatever. That would be the teacher acting in their freedom of speech and religious expression, but not while they're doing their actual teacher duties. That would make sense. And perhaps maybe a student might walk by the door, peek in the window, see what's happening. That's all, honestly the only thing that I can imagine of how and when this could possibly be okay, right? I can't think of another context where an educator would be allowed to speak about their religious beliefs and personal beliefs when around students, because the moment they're around students, they're operating in their official capacities as educators, right? So my second question would be, why is there a clause about being observed by students? Because this shouldn't be happening when students are around. Like I said, if a student's passing by the door and peers through the window, I mean, that's a little bit inevitable, but a teacher shouldn't be doing this with students, knowing students are around, right? And then there's also the clause about students being pressured to join in. So why does it have to say that? Why would students even potentially feel pressured to join in? Again, when an educator is with a student, they're acting in their official capacities, are they not? Do you see how this is so contradictory? I don't understand. If they're not allowed to talk about their religion and their personal views in front of students, why do we have clauses saying, well, if it does happen, then it's okay as long as students aren't pressured in, or as long as they don't think that the school endorsed it or something. It just feels like we're jumping through a million hoops to talk about a situation that shouldn't even happen in the first place, right? So with all these questions that I had, I went to the NEA, and it explains a bit more succinctly how teachers are limited in their First Amendment rights when they are at school and working as educators. And it says that employers, aka schools, can control and limit what educators say as part of their official duties. And these official duties include teaching a class, holding a parent-teacher conference, driving a school bus, and wait for it, coaching a team like Coach Kennedy. The NEA also says that free speech may be protected when teachers are on the clock but not doing those official duties. So, for example, planning time, between class breaks, exactly what I was imagining, that, oh, well, maybe teachers could pray during their planning period or before school. The NEA clarifies that and says that, yes, that is okay. Now, explain this to me. Coach Kennedy was hired to do what exactly? Coach Kennedy was hired to coach a team. Now, I am not into sports. I don't do sports. I don't know what happens in the locker room. But from my understanding, a coach is on duty before the game, during the game, and after the game. Because before the game, you got to get the team ready, give them a pep talk. And then during the game, obviously coaching. And then after the game, you got to go back into the locker room, talk about what happened, what you guys did well, what you need to work on, upcoming games, practices. I don't know. But the coach is on duty before, during, and after. Are they not? Then anytime during that pre, during, and post-game period, Coach Kennedy is acting in his official duties. And as the Department of Education clearly states, and as the NEA clearly states, he cannot show any religious expression when operating in his official duties as an educator. And again, both sources said that when employees are acting in their official duties, their First Amendment free speech rights are not necessarily protected. Okay? They are not speaking as citizens for First Amendment purposes. So Coach Kennedy is not protected by the Constitution when he prays on the field right after a game. He is still operating in his official coach capacity, and he cannot be doing that religious expression. So my major question is, how the fuck did the Supreme Court rule in his favor? I don't understand this. I really don't. Again, I pushing it, I guess one could say, well, it was post-game. He wasn't in his official duties. But he was still in the clock. I mean, you still have students there. They're still in uniform. It's not, oh, shoot, I thought everyone was already home. I was praying in the locker room. Oh, so sorry you had to see this. No, it was literally on the field. I do not understand how they could have decided that this was constitutional. Even the Department of Education, which was edited after the Supreme Court decision, clearly states that when teachers and educators are operating in their official duties, their First Amendment rights are not necessarily protected. But then why did the Supreme Court rule in his favor? I don't understand. Now, apparently, they decided in Coach Kennedy's favor because they said that he was not coercing or manipulating students. Now, I have to disagree. As I have just explained, he shouldn't have been allowed to do this in the first place. It is clearly unconstitutional. He was operating in his official capacities, and he should not be able to do that. And secondly, I would argue that actually Coach Kennedy was coercing and manipulating students. Now, there are two main reasons why. The first one is that Christianity calls its followers to impact other people. Okay? Great Commission, go and make disciples. Christianity encourages people to talk about their faith. And as an ex-Christian, I can 100% say that I purposefully did things so that people would see me in a certain way. I purposefully did things so that people would say, oh my gosh, you're a Christian. I wanted people to see me pray, to see me do Christian things. I specifically wanted to impact those around me. It wasn't something that I wanted to do alone. Like I felt called by God to impact those around me, manipulate those around me, in other words. That is a core part of Christianity. Evangelize, go and make disciples. You are called to impact other people. And I'm not going to speak for all Christian educators because I know that there are some amazing Christian educators out there. But I was a Christian educator at one point, and I went to school with several potential rising Christian educators. And what I saw and what I did personally was, looking back on it now, outrageous. During my education, I went for a time to a Christian college, and we talked a lot about how to share Christ and spread the gospel in school in a legal way. It was essentially a discussion about pushing the limits. When do we cross where's the line? How do we push our religious beliefs without crossing that line or without people knowing that we crossed the line. This was a common discussion that we had. And at that point, I was questioning a lot of things in my personal beliefs, and that honestly opened my eyes to a lot of things in Christianity in general, but that's a whole nother topic. But the issue still is that many Christian educators want their students to see Christ through them. They want to impact their students in a religious manner. They are not just there to talk about math, science, reading, or football. They are there because they feel a calling from God and to touch the hearts of their students. Again, I am speaking in general. I'm sure there's some Christian educators out there that understand the limit when it comes to public education. But even I, as an educator, I pushed those limits and I crossed them, unfortunately. And I felt that it was okay because God's call on my life was more important than a human-made law. That was something that I was taught for years and something that I also supported for years, that our ultimate judge was God. And any human law that goes against what God's law and what God calls us to do, and we can ignore. So I can clearly see how Coach Kennedy is trying to maybe not openly coerce, maybe not openly manipulate, but he is trying to impact his students. He is trying to get them to believe a certain thing without maybe directly saying, you need to believe in God. But his actions, he's using his actions to influence them. And I would say that is coercion. So why else was this coercion? 2 words for you: peer pressure. Okay. Coach Kennedy was doing this, praying on the field, giving religious motivational speeches for 7 years. 7 years, people. I don't know how somebody didn't come forward and say, hey, this isn't okay sooner. But I mean, that's besides the point. 7 years. This was already the norm. People knew that joining Coach Kennedy on the team would probably include some prayers, some Christian-ish things. And of course, students were already used to doing this. Why would they speak up? This was normal for them. This was okay. And those who are already used to doing this with the coach would, of course, want to continue doing it with him. Just because he's not saying, hey, guys, let's go pray together. They're probably still used to, okay, it's after a game, Coach Kennedy's praying, we're going to go with him. Even though he's not forcing them to go pray with him, even though he's not saying, oh, I'm not going to put you in the game if you don't go pray with me, even though it's not that blatant, it's still happening. This is still something that the kids have been used to, and this is their coach. They want to be with their coach. This is a team. Remember, this is a sports team. Sports teams are meant to develop teamwork, solidarity. You act as one unit. You stick up for each other. You do things together as a team. So if the coach is praying, what are the kids going to do? They see their example. They see their coach. They see their leader and say, we've been doing this before. Screw the school. We're going to do this together. We're a team. We stand up for this. This is what Coach Kennedy is essentially implementing into the kids' minds. Okay. And let's just imagine something. Okay. I'm going to show you guys a picture. This is Coach Kennedy. Do you see how many people and players on the field? Do you see that? Now tell me this isn't peer pressure. How would you feel as a teen if you didn't believe in God and you saw all of your teammates go onto the field, go pray, and you felt like this was maybe something ridiculous, something stupid, but would you want to be left out? Would you want to be ostracized? No, you would want to go and join in on your team. And I don't know what has happened, but let's just say that if somebody did try and say, oh, I don't want to pray, we don't know whether the teammates ridiculed them, ostracized them as kind of punishment for doing that. We don't know the team dynamics. That could have honestly happened, understanding high school dynamics. That could have happened. So essentially what Coach Kennedy here is doing is not directly using peer pressure because he's not a peer, but he is creating an environment for peer pressure to develop, and he is setting an example for other kids of the same religion to follow, and therefore pressuring those students who might not believe in that to join in because they are a team, and that's what teammates do. They stick together. Now, understandably, a lot of people might not recognize this as coercion because Christianity is the major religion in this country. And while the number of Christians in the U.S. has significantly decreased in the past couple of decades, it's still the main religion for over 2/3 of the population. So I understand. It's hard to recognize something as coercion when people are so used to it, when people are so used to hearing it. It's like, oh, it's just prayer. It's whatever. It's not doing any harm. It is. It's doing a lot of harm. But essentially praying on a football field, especially when a lot of Christians pray about games, and there's a strange connection between sports and faith that I personally never understood, but it's there for a lot of people. So when people see a Christian praying on the field for a sports team that doesn't go against public morals, that's not hurting anybody, that's okay because this is something we're used to. That doesn't make it okay. That doesn't make it constitutional, you guys. But looking at it in that light, I think it makes it easier to understand why it took 7 freaking years for somebody to finally bring this forward and suspend Coach Kennedy for what he was doing. Now, moving on to the judges on this case, unfortunately, I feel that the judges have fallen into the same kind of viewpoint that Christianity is the norm, so it's okay. And I feel like they are acting with blinders on. They are not seeing the big picture here. They are not considering people outside of their own little circle and religious opinion. Of course, there are 9 judges on the Supreme Court, so they voted 6-3 in favor of Kennedy. The 6 favorable votes were from conservative judges. I think this comes as no surprise to us. But, I mean, it's still unfortunate. So, the judge who offered the overall summary was Justice Neil M. Gorsuch. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Who was nominated by President Trump in 2017. Now, interestingly, his bio on oyez.org has a quote from him about religious freedom. And I'm going to read that to you because it's pretty ironic. So he says, talking about Justice Gorsuch, he also gained a reputation for broadly defining and then protecting religious liberties, writing that the law doesn't just apply to protect popular religious beliefs. It does perhaps its most important work in protecting unpopular religious beliefs, vindicating this nation's long-held aspiration to serve as a refuge of religious tolerance. Now, he might have said that, but did he act on that in this 2002 court case? Absolutely not. He 100% sided with the popular religious belief. Okay. If this quote is truly how he feels, I struggle to understand why he voted this way. And I mean, if he actually believed this, he would understand how isolating public prayer for a majority religion can be for those from a minority religion. So this judge literally protected the beliefs of the majority religious group in a scenario that should not even have had religious expression to begin with. So this quote from him is just, I don't know. I find it ironic. I don't know if he said that just to sound nice or if he's had a change of heart. I don't know. It's just speculation. And I also have to come back to this point that I mentioned before about the defense and some of the judges saying that denying Coach Kennedy this right to pray on the field would be akin to denying a Muslim from wearing a headscarf or a Christian from wearing a cross necklace. And for that argument to come from this justice, who is someone who supposedly protects religious liberties, is, again, completely ironic, because someone that understands that would understand that these analogies don't line up. Wearing a headscarf, or to put it in more Judeo-Christian terms, okay, a cross necklace or a Star of David is not the same as praying in front of students. Simple as that. Perhaps a more appropriate comparison to a Christian prayer on a field would be allowing Muslim teachers to perform salat in front of students. And let me just say that if that happened, there would be so much uproar from parents that that teacher would probably get fired immediately. But an interesting point is that, again, I am speaking very generally, but we generally don't see people of the Muslim faith praying in public. Who do we see praying in public? Christians. Why? Because Christianity encourages people to influence and impact and change other people. Many people from many other religions don't. So, do you see the issue here? Again, it is very subtle, but it is there. It is coercion and manipulation. Okay. And the argument that praying in front of students is akin to praying for, let's say, a meal is, again, incorrect, because teachers are not allowed to pray for meals in front of students. Okay. We already looked at the documentation from the Department of Education and the NEA. Teachers are allowed the religious expression when not operating in their official educator capacities. If they are eating with students, that means they're either on lunch duty or they're meeting with a student to go over some class material or whatever. It means they are with students. Therefore, they are operating in their official capacities. Okay, so you can't pray over a meal. I mean, if you do it in your head without any outward showing of prayer, that's fine. Can't control your thoughts. But if you physically show a form of religious expression, that's not okay. It's not okay to do that in front of students, period. Now, of course, all that to say that Judge Goresh and all the other 5 judges that voted in favor of Coach Kennedy are misinformed, which is very sad to say because they are Supreme Court judges. I don't know. Maybe it's not sad. It's a bit terrifying to know that these people are interpreting the law for us. So now, all that said, I do want to point out that one judge, Sonia Sotomayor, again, my apologies for mispronouncing any names, she did write a very eloquent dissent that I would like to share with you guys because I think it offers a slight beacon of hope in this disaster of a case. And I think she puts it more eloquently than I could ever. So she says, "Today, the court once again weakens the backstop. It elevates one individual's interest in personal religious exercise in the exact time and place of that individual's choosing over society's interest in protecting the separation between church and state, eroding the protections for religious liberty for all. Today's decision is particularly misguided because it elevates the religious rights of a school official who voluntarily accepted public employment and the limits that public employment entails over those of his students who are required to attend school and who this court has long recognized are particularly vulnerable and deserving of protection. In doing so, the court sets us further down a perilous path in forcing states to entangle themselves with religion, with all of our rights hanging in the balance. As much as the court protests otherwise, today's decision is no victory for religious liberty. I respectfully dissent." And I agree. It was beautifully said. Couldn't have put it better myself. Now, this court case with Coach Kennedy happened in 2022. And like I said, this court case removed the lemon test. It has set us up for the horrible legislation that is ongoing now. But even before the court decided on the Coach Kennedy case, there were several states pushing already to bring religion back into public school. So what is happening today in 2025 is not necessarily a direct result of the 2022 case, although it has certainly affected it and opened the path for it. But even before then, there has been a general push across the country for religion to come back in public schools. Okay, so I'm going to briefly go over a few bills that were proposed in the years leading up to the Coach Kennedy case. The first of those being a Georgia bill in 2021. It is Bill 547, and it proposed that each public school classroom teacher would conduct a brief period of quiet reflection for up to 60 seconds that is not intended for religious service or exercise, but does allow students to stand up and lead the class in a pre-written Christian prayer. Oh, gosh. Okay. I'm laughing because this is just so utterly ridiculous. Yeah. Sad and ridiculous. Do we laugh or do we cry? But So this bill stated that students would not, of course, be obligated to participate, but it would still give them the space and opportunity for all students to be subject to this prayer. So whether they participated or not, they still had to be present, which is disgusting to me. It's basically forcing them to hear religious material. It's gross. Now, I guess the supporters of this bill believed that it was constitutional because the students would lead prayer if desired. Remember that students are free to express themselves in school. However, this is a prayer in front of all of the other students. This is not a one-on-one discussion. This is not a debate. It is a teacher giving space to students. So it's not teacher-led, but it is teacher-guided or overseen by teacher. Okay, this is not a normal conversation between two students. This is a space to allow for prayer if decided. And on top of that, the prayer that would have been approved if this bill had passed was a Christian prayer that specifically identifies Jesus Christ, which of course makes it a clear religious affiliation to the Christian faith. Now, obviously, giving the space for prayer in a public school classroom seems to directly go against the court case Engel versus Vattel. So I don't know how this was even drafted, but the Engel versus Vattel case, if you remember, prohibited a non-religious affiliated prayer. So this bill promoted a clearly religious affiliated prayer. So I would have to say that this is even doubly unconstitutional. There's one, giving a space for prayer, classroom-wide prayer, and two, it is a clearly religious affiliated prayer that would be allowed. So even if students can opt out, where are they going to go? You're going to send them out to the hall? Like, that's ridiculous. Or you want them to put headphones in so they don't hear the prayer? That's so stupid. Stupid and unconstitutional, guys. Also in 2001, we have Texas Bill 2399, which proposed that public and charter schools not affiliated with a religious organization may vote to include a period of daily prayer and Bible readings. Similar to the Georgia bill, it is supposedly voluntary. Students and teachers who want to participate in this time would have to sign forms acknowledging that this is a free choice, that they have no objections, and that they waive any constitutional claims against the school regarding the Establishment Clause. What? I feel like that is an open admission that this bill goes against the Constitution, saying, okay, we're going to put this in and everybody has to sign a form that they can't use the Establishment Clause against us because we secretly know that this goes against it. It's ridiculous. Now, the bill specifically said that the prayer wouldn't be done over a loudspeaker, of course, to accommodate the Santa Fe versus Doe court case that we saw, since that would be obviously using government funds to support the prayer. And the bill also goes on to say that the sessions would only occur in situations where those who have signed the forms could attend. So that would include situations like before school, maybe in a teacher's classroom with submitted consent forms, or anywhere at all in the school if all teachers and students sign the forms. Guys, this is in public schools. I can't believe this. Now, I see this bill trying to address all potential objections, what with the forms and organizing in areas where non-Christians won't get offended. But where's the bill proposing that we read the Quran in classes? That doesn't exist. What about the bill, I don't know, exploring natural humanism or the Satanic Temple tenets or Hinduism? Where are all the bills supporting that? If they don't exist, it's only Christianity, guys. What the actual fuck? I can't believe this. Let's move on to Mississippi. So in 2028, the state actually established a law that public schools can have that 60-second quiet period that we talked about for Georgia. And it's a reflection period, okay? It's not a prayer period, it's a reflection period. Now, I guess that technically works around the Engel versus Vattel decision, since it's not a prayer, just reflection, but we all know that some of the people enacting it will use it as a time of prayer. Let's be real, okay? Bible Belt. If people are promoting this law. They're doing it for a reason, because they want Christianity in schools. So who's stopping a teacher from saying, instead of, oh, this is a period of reflection, oh, this is a period of reflection and prayer? Or even going further than that. Like I said, a lot of people that I interacted with who are Christians and educators wanted to push those limits, and this law allows for them to push and even cross those limits. Okay, this is why I am so upset about what is going on. Okay, so Mississippi passed that law in 2018. Then in 2022, they proposed Bill 249 that would have actually included the opportunity for prayer had it been passed, just like the aforementioned Georgia bill. However, it wasn't passed. But it specifically stated that students can lead a non-sectarian, non-proselytizing prayer in silence or out loud. That is towing a very dangerous line. Actually, no, that line has been crossed. And this is just a slow transition into just straight up putting religion back into public schools, which is what is on the table today. Moving on to Kentucky. Now, the state already has a law stating that public school students can recite the Lord's Prayer, which is, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, etc. And the Pledge of Allegiance. Oh, but don't worry. Okay, don't worry. Students can choose whether to participate. That makes it all better, right? But does this sound familiar? I mean, if we think back to the court cases that we talked about, Abington Township versus Shemp, remember that ruling that decided that recitation of the Lord's Prayer and Bible reading was unconstitutional? Remember that? No? Apparently in Kentucky, they don't remember it either. So, and in this Kentucky bill, even if the students opt out, the teachers will still tell them that the Lord's Prayer is history. Okay, it's what the Pilgrim Fathers recited when they came to this country in search of freedom. I don't know. I just think that's so ironic, right? So many people settled into this country seeking religious freedom. And what are governments and schools doing? They're limiting religious freedoms by reciting a Christian prayer. I mean, we're just cycling backwards, guys. I don't care if they say it's not a religious lesson. It is. If they were purely focusing on history, they would also, I don't know, share prayers from other groups that were in the country at that time. Maybe native prayers, maybe prayers from people groups that came later on in the history of this country. Crazy. And also teaching the Lord's Prayer to these kids is just disgusting to me. These kids are young and impressionable, and it's just gross to have them recite the Lord's Prayer. And they're probably not going home to their parents and saying, Mom, Dad, we recited the Lord's Prayer. And I assume that a lot of parents don't know that this is happening. And would they feel comfortable with that? I don't know. It feels a lot like indoctrination. Like this is something that you would expect if you go to Sunday school. And that's why people take their kids to Sunday school, to have this, not public education. This shouldn't be happening in public schools. Now, another part of the law, we're still in Kentucky, states that a public school can enact a 60-second moment of silence. Now, in 2022, a bill proposed changing that, making the moment of silence or reflection mandatory and increasing it to 1 to 2 minutes. Not a lot, but still. I mean, when you're sitting there in silence or listening to prayer, it can feel like an eternity. The bill also added a whole section about how it will be a voluntary act and not affiliated with any religion. But again, let's be real here. The students are already potentially reciting the Lord's Prayer, and many of the teachers may be religious. Consider the area, the state. It's Kentucky. It's very possible that the teachers are religious. So it is not a stretch of the imagination to think that a Christian teacher might take that moment of silence, moment of supposed reflection, and bow their head in prayer because they're already doing the Lord's Prayer in class. So what are the students potentially seeing? A form of religious expression in the public classroom. This is just pushing things way too far. All right, we have one more case before we go into the state-by-state legislation. And this one happened in 2022. Before the Supreme Court made their final decision, they were still debating it when this was written. So this bill is actually titled Coach Kennedy's Law. So It's so crazy to me. I'm sorry. It's completely outrageous. But this bill stated that the athletic department staff were fully within their constitutional rights to utter prayers out loud before, during, or after student athletic events. This is absolutely insane to me because it goes directly against what is clearly laid out by the Department of Education as what is appropriate religious expression. We went over this. Remember, teachers have religious freedoms when they're not operating in their official capacities as educators, and that includes sports staff, coaches. Athletic staff are required to work with students before, during, and after sports events. So how can this supposed Coach Kennedy's law actually state that it is within the coach's constitutional rights to do religious activities during those times? I don't understand. I don't understand at all. Now, there's a clause in this bill saying that students, again, have the right to opt out because you always have to state that it's voluntary. But I have to come back to the point that whether or not you say it's voluntary doesn't really matter if a educator or somebody in a leadership position in a school is doing this in front of the students, because it is coercion and manipulation. And I already explained why. It's not okay. You can't expect a student to say, oh, I opt out and everything be okay. That's not how this works. And another point is that students have a constitutional right to express their viewpoints in school and also not to be subjected to watch and hear their teachers' personal religious views. They have a right not to hear it. They shouldn't even have to opt out, especially not in sports events when camaraderie is so critical. Equality and true separation of church and state would give everyone the chance to opt in if they wanted to, not force a certain percentage of the people to opt out when they don't want to hear something. That's not true equality. That's not separation of church and state. That's some fancy, not even fancy language. That's just something they added in to make it seem like it's constitutional. But guys, it's not. It's absolutely not. Now, the somewhat good news about all of these cases is that most of them were not passed. However, as I mentioned, some states already have some laws established that have opened the door to bringing religion back into public education. And I mean, call it what you want, a history lesson, a moment of silence, a moment of reflection, whatever. That's not what it is. This is bringing religion into school. This is welcoming Christianity back into public schools, and it's not okay. It's not constitutional. I don't care what name you give it. And guess what? There are even more religious bills being proposed, being written, and even signed into law that are welcoming Christianity back into public schools. And both the Coach Kennedy case and the recent election results have seemed to push even more conservative Christian legislator into creation. If you want to watch the whole video about how Christianity is coming back into public schools, check out the link in the description below.